Stoicism and the Art of Living in Peace. Complete lesson. There is a persistent illusion that accompanies us, believing that peace will come when everything around us is finally in order. But life rarely organizes itself as we expect. There will always be currents crossing our path, winds changing direction, external voices trying to mold what we think and feel. It is in this scenario that the paradox of peace reveals itself. It is not born from the absence of problems, but from the ability to get through them without falling apart inside. Seneca, in his Reflections, describes the serene man not as one who does not suffer, but as one who does not allow himself to be shaken by what he suffers. It is an internal engineering built little by little, where each thought is put in place like someone building a solid house on unstable ground. It is not about denying pain, but about preventing it from becoming the architect of our lives. Marcus Aurelius would add by reminding us that peace is not in the world we see, but in the way we look at it. Two men can go through the same storm. One feels like he is drowning. The other sails with firmness. The difference is in the rudder, not in the wave. True peace is not passive. It is like a calm river that, beneath its tranquil surface, holds deep currents that follow their course with firmness. He who looks from the outside sees quietness, but he who gets closer feels the strength that sustains that silence. It is this silent strength that we need to cultivate, a presence that does not break at the first impact, but that also does not become so hardened that it loses its flexibility. More than a lesson, what you will find here is a map. Not a map with easy shortcuts or promises of eternal calm, but a practical route to cultivate a serenity that does not depend on circumstance. A path so that even when the world shouts, you can hear the sound of your own breath and realize there is still a stable center within you. And it is from this center that everything else begins. The invisible noise that steals our mind. Restlessness does not always arise from great tragedy. Often, it seeps in small, almost imperceptible doses until it becomes part of the air we breathe. They are the micro-anxiety, the notification that interrupts a thought, the silent comparison with the lives of others, the invented urgencies that make us run without knowing where. Each of them is like a grain of sand. Alone, it seems harmless, but together they form a weight that accumulates within us. Seneca, attentive to the waste of energy that we cultivate without realizing it, reminded us that haste is the enemy of clarity. Running all the time is not a sign of productivity, but of internal disorder. It's like carrying stones in your shoe. We can keep walking, but with every step, we increase the wear and tear until the pain becomes inevitable. And the curious thing is that even when we know the stones are there, we resist stopping to remove them. The mind also has its messy drawers. Even when they are closed, we know they are in disarray, and this weighs on us. It is a silent but constant knowledge that accompanies us in everything we do. We can try to ignore it, but it creeps in during moments of pause, stealing our rest. When we don't take care of these small disorders, we allow them to take up too much space and drain the energy that could be used for what really matters. The invisible noise does not shout, but it corrodes. It keeps us in a continuous state of alertness, as if something urgent were always about to happen. However, much of these urgencies are invented or inherited, expectations we have never questioned, commitments we accept out of habit. And it is at this point that Stoic philosophy becomes practical. By removing unnecessary haste, we take the key to our peace out of the world's hand. Perhaps the first step to living in peace is to see what makes us restless in silence. Not to run away, but to reorganize, because just as a drawer can be emptied, reordered, the mind can also return to being a space where everything has its place. And when the invisible weight dissolves, we discover that peace of mind is not something distant. It has always been there, waiting for us to find it. The mistake of waiting for the world to calm down first. There are those who live in a state of waiting, as if peace were a future event, conditioned on the resolution of problems, the end of crises, or the disappearance of all noise. When things get better, when I have more time, when the situation calms down. These phrases build a suspended life where tranquility becomes a promise that is always postponed. The problem is that the world does not follow our calendar, and while we wait, the days keep passing. Marcus Aurelius, in the face of the pressures and instabilities of his time, reminded us that you have power over your mind, not over external events. It is an uncomfortable but liberating reminder. To wait for the world to get organized before finding serenity is to hand over the key to your own peace to forces that we will never control. It's like being on a boat in the middle of a rough sea and believing that we can only row when the waves stop. What happens in practice is that we are left adrift. Stoicism breaks this logic by proposing peace as an act of rebellion against chaos, not aggressive rebellion, but the silent refusal to allow the exterior to determine the interior. It is to decide that even if circumstances are harsh, what happens inside us can remain firm. It's like lighting an oil lamp in the middle of a storm. We may not be able to illuminate the entire sea, but we can prevent the darkness from completely taking hold of us. Waiting for external calm is often a disguised form of fear. We postpone decisions, avoid confronting discomforts, and convince ourselves that in the future it will be easier. But the truth is that there is no perfect moment. Each day carries its share of instability, and if we do not learn to walk on it, we will be eternal prisoners of circumstance. Peace is not a consequence of an organized world, but the posture of one who decides to navigate even in rough sea. It is an intimate gesture of autonomy, to recognize that if what is outside is uncertain, what is inside can be cultivated with constant. And by acting this way, we discover that serenity does not need permission to exist. It just needs to be chosen here and now. The practice of limits and active silence. Not all silence is a virtue. There is a silence that is born of cowardice, which hides to avoid conflict, and another that is the fruit of strength, capable of sustaining clarity, even in the midst of noise. The first paralyzes, the second protects. Knowing the difference between them is one of the keys to living in peace. In Stoicism, silence is not an absence of action, but a conscious choice of where to place one's energy. It is to understand that not every response needs to be given, and not every provocation needs to be followed. Marcus Aurelius, in the face of political and military pressures, found in withdrawal a refuge to think and act with precision. Just as a blade loses its edge if used without a break, the mind gets worn out when it is constantly exposed to stimuli and dispute. Creating periods of active silence is like sharpening that blade, an interval to regain its cutting edge, so that the next action is exact and not a blind blow. Active silence is made of clear boundaries. It is refusing an excess of information, reducing exposure to voices that only amplify chaos, and allowing the mind to breathe without being constantly invaded. It is not an escape, it is preparation. Just as a soldier does not remain eternally in battle, but returns to base to reorganize his forces, we also need moments of withdrawal to sustain clarity. There is power in a pause, a power that is not shown in grandiose gestures, but in the balance that is maintained when the world tries to drag us away. It is in this space, free from constant stimuli, that we can observe our own thoughts as if they were clouds in the sky, some dense and heavy, others light and transient. The simple act of seeing them without reacting is already a training of internal mastery. When silence is cultivated with intention, it does not distance us from life, but returns us to it in a more whole way. And thus, each established boundary does not become a wall of isolation, but a contour that preserves what is most valuable, the ability to act justly, firmly, and serenely, even when everything around us calls for haste and react, rebuilding the internal space as a refuge. There is a point where peace ceases to be something we seek outside and becomes something we build within. This internal space is like a house that needs constant care. If abandoned, it accumulates dust, cracks, and drafts that weaken its wall. But when we take care of it with attention, it becomes a refuge that protects us, even in the most violent storm. Rebuilding this place is not the work of one day, but of small, consistent gestures that, when added together, change the entire structure. Seneca saw virtue not as an ornament to be displayed, but as the foundation on which tranquility is built. It is virtue that gives firmness to the ground, that prevents us from collapsing at the first shock. Without this foundation, any conquest is fragile, any wreck is temporary. Therefore, rebuilding the internal space begins with simple rituals that anchor the present, writing 3 sentences before sleeping to order the mind, walking without a destination to listen to one's own thoughts, or simply observing one's breath until the body remembers that it is alive. These rituals function as invisible pillars. They do not require a lot of time or extreme effort, but they offer something essential, a daily return to the center. It is as if, in performing each of them, we are telling ourselves that there is a safe place to return to, regardless of what happens outside. Over time, this repetition creates deep root, and when the world applies pressure, there is no collapse, only an adjustment of the internal refuge is not made to ice, but to sustain. It is in it that we find the clarity to act with just courage to face what is inevitable, and the serenity to refuse what does not serve us. To rebuild this space is to choose to live not as one who reacts to chance, but as one who, with patience, molds their own ground. And when this work is constant, peace ceases to be a rare visitor and comes to live with us. Seneca reminded us that living with dignity is inseparable from living in peace, and that this peace is not a gift granted by circumstance, but the result of a life that is coherent with one's own principles. When our actions and values walk in the same direction, there is no room for the internal conflict that corrodes serenity. Even in the midst of the world's noise, there is a silent music playing inside us, the harmony between who we are and what we do. Cicero reinforced this view when he spoke of moral coherence. Living in peace is also refusing gains that cost one's conscience. There is no real victory when the price is one's own self-respect. It is a choice that in the short term may seem like a loss, but that in the long term builds an invisible fortress against guilt and regret. The mind that remains faithful to itself is not easily disturbed. We can think of the mind as a house. It can be luxurious with visible decorations and riches and yet be unbearable to live in. Because what defines a home is not what is hung on the wall, but what is felt when one is inside it. In the same way, the mind only becomes a safe place when what we keep in it is light, whole, and true. There is no reason to wait for external calm. It may never arrive, or it may last less than we imagine. The true conquest is to build within oneself a space where we can sit, close our eyes, and feel that we have arrived. A place that does not depend on the mood of the day, the direction of the economy, or the opinion of others. A place that is ours, silent and solid. And when we find this place, it doesn't matter whether the world is at war or at a party. Peace then ceases to be a distant dream and becomes the ground we walk, because in the end, it is not the scenery that defines the traveler, the strength with which he walks.